Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. We're going to start the day off with a little auction. The Republicans had 15-minute fundraising auction. Auctioned off some chapstick. Evidently, it was used by Speaker McCarthy. Not sure. There's a whole lot of places you could go with this. Not sure if this was before or after meeting with the crazy caucus and having to do a bunch of, kissing. Not sure if that's it. But this little tube of chapstick used on whatever member of Congress from the Speaker went for $100,000. And that was purchased by Marjorie Three Names. And I'm so happy that there's nothing urgent going on. I'm so happy that there's nothing important that they should be working on. I'm so thrilled that we live in utopia, that there's plenty of time for shenanigans and nonsense, and told that the cherry flavor might have been the deal sealer. I'm not quite sure, but there it is. And what I loved her, she's got her little thing, getting her attention. But again, it's one of those things where you go, I'm sure glad that we don't have anything else to do. Anything pressing, I don't know, debt ceiling about ready to cave in on us. I don't know. Infrastructure that needs to be done. I don't know. Just seems like one of those things. Now here's what bothers me is we're ticking down the days. We're 9 days away, I guess, from the default. And I've been saying for a while, I think the president eventually has to use the 14th Amendment. I would already be moving in that direction and signaling that when we have to default, because look, he's gonna wait till it happens. And once it happens, then he has to go and he's going to have to do something. And I think you have to go this route because the Constitution seems pretty clear. 14th Amendment seems fairly clear in this. But then again, to me, the Second Amendment seems pretty clear when you go that whole well-regulated militia thing. But I think in this moment, the Supreme Court going to be on his side because this is what business leaders want. This is, I guess, a positive of having a bought and paid for court. With all of their corporate patches and stuff. Now, I was thinking about this today. And someone, asked me, why do we keep why does this keep coming up? You spend the money knowing that eventually you're going to bump up against the limit. Because, most people think about it as like your credit card. You know that if you're going to spend something that's above your credit limit, you're not going to be able to get it. And we think like this ourselves as individuals. And I was saying, look, our government doesn't work the same way. We can argue that it should. It doesn't. It's got 350 million people that it's got to service. And some get serviced a lot better than others. And, some use chapstick while doing it. And others are left out in the cold. And this is one of those moments where, when you look at the cuts that are being talked about, we're going to go after TANF. We're going to go after work requirements for any help for people over 50. They're narrowly putting this out there so that they can look like the good guys. And what it is just kicking the door open. And what they've learned, and this is where I went to this, I said Republicans have learned that the Democrats will give in because they care. This is the fatal flaw of most Democrats. They have compassion, they have empathy, they have sympathy, they care for others, they care about their neighbors, they care about their communities, they care about their kids, they care about other people's kids. They care. They are not going to burn the house down. That's not in their nature. Now, my conservative friends, I truly believe they'll burn it down. That this hostage situation, this one's different than the past ones. This one, I do believe they really do want to shoot the hostage. And I point to Matt Gaetz, who I guess, decided, hey, it's open season. Everyone knows it's a hostage situation. Everyone knows Republicans are holding the country hostage. So he said, hey, I think my conservative colleagues, for the most part, support limit, save, grow. That's their bill. And they don't feel we should negotiate with our hostage. Did he just admit that the American people are their hostages? Did he just admit that the country is their hostage and they've got this leverage, they've got this moment to get all of their wet dream list passed? Oh, we can cut VA funding, we can cut food stamp funding, we can cut housing assistance, we can cut all of those programs that, help people, while simultaneously ensuring that our very well-to-do are very well-to-do. Now, what I find interesting is I've had it posed to me a number of times that this is Biden versus McCarthy. This is the two of them. This is the red hat, blue hat. And I've said, no, I don't think the frame is that at all. I think Biden has said, look, you've got to do your job. So come back when your job is done. But this is really the Republican Party, the hostage takers, and the hostages, us. It's the Republican Party against us. Biden's just there. He said what he's willing to do. And I had this conversation today of it being like let's say the money's in the bank. Congress already spent the money. It's already out the door. It's already allocated. It's already earmarked. It's already in the account. The executive's job is just to write the checks. The purse, people who spent the money. It's already spent. It's already there. It's already been allocated. It's already planned. It's already moving. You can't then come back and go, well, we've now changed our minds and we're going to hold you hostage while doing it. It's not a way to run a lemonade stand, let alone one of the more powerful countries on earth. Now, the thing is, and I talked about this yesterday, most people, I guess the polling is pretty consistent in the 60% range. Most people want cuts. We should be cutting stuff. And as I said, I'm not opposed to cutting things. It's what are we cutting? What are our priorities? What is it that we, as moral beings, as compassionate beings, as empathetic beings, what is it we're willing to cut? Are you literally going to take food out of the mouths of children? And, I think about the former governor of Maine, Paula Page. Remember Paula Page, who used to joke about that he was excited when he could take candy away from children. That was a high point for him. I see him as kind of the conservative way of thinking today. Wish I was wrong. Wish it weren't true. But when you start talking about what should we be cutting, should we be cutting basic infrastructure things? Should we be cutting necessities? That safety net that keeps people from falling through, or should we slash and burn and let people fall where they may? And are we the society that's going to allow homeless people to starve to death on the streets? Are we the society that's going to go, hey, well, sorry, you couldn't get health insurance. You're on your own. Are we that country now? Because I tell you, I think we're moving there. I think as conservative states become more powerful, as Republicans take over more legislatures, and we move to the states' rights arguments that let the states decide, I think you'll see states that are going to be willing to allow people just to languish on the streets. And occasionally you'll get some lip service, but for the most part, do you see policies out there that are going to help move us in a positive direction? I don't. And this is where my frustration is. Now, both Biden and McCarthy came out today. No one's close to a debt limit increase. And I don't know that we're going to get there by June 1st. We could default. And that's going to cause real problems. It could trigger a sizable recession, as some economists are saying quite possibly is going to happen. So you go ask yourself why. If you know what the consequences are, if you know what you're doing and you go into it open-eyed, open-minded, say, you know what, this is so important. Taking food away from children and kicking people out of their homes and doing all the things that will happen once the cuts that they've thrown out there happen. Is it that important? Is it that important to them? And the answer evidently is yes. It is that important. It is their ideology. But more importantly, the only way they're going to hold on to 2024 is if there is a recession. The only way that they can get people to be angry and outraged and go to the polls is if economically they're struggling. Because understand, people are pretty riled up over the abortion issue. And as more jobs keep coming online and we start rebuilding more things, more people are going to start turning around their thinking and going, hey, maybe this is the right way to go. Question is can Republicans hold on long enough? Will our apathy, will our attention span serve us long enough that we're going to remember? Republicans are hoping that we don't. And they need a good crisis so they can take advantage of it. To me, it's very clear. We have raised the debt ceiling. I don't even know how many times, 100 times, 90 times. And as my friend Bob Ney says, it was always a yawn vote because you already spent the money. The time to argue about spending would be, I don't know, maybe before you spend it. Do you want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got lots to get to, lots to talk about. Quick break, right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
The phone lines are open. Give Rick a call at 1-866-416-RICK. That's 1-866-416-7425.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So according to an AP NORC poll, Americans aren't happy with the economy. In fact, only 21% of adults think that we are moving in the right direction. Count me in there. I think we are making the decisions and doing the things that are moving us in the right direction. The problem is we've got a media culture that plays on negativity. Oh, they play on negativity. Only 36% of Democrats say that we're going in the right direction. 7% of Republicans. I'm surprised it's that high. 24% say the economy's in good shape. 76 thinks it's in poor condition. And here's the weird thing. No matter how much Republicans try, they can't push us into a recession. I mean, no matter how much the Federal Reserve tries, they can't push the country into a recession. They can't do it. I don't know why. Resilience of American spending? I don't know. But it's quite remarkable. And what's I was reading an Atlantic article here earlier today. No, actually, it was Washington Monthly. The Atlantic was a different one. Washington Monthly said, the reality is inflation is coming down. Wages are going up. Why is it that Biden isn't getting credit for this? And the reality is they do a crummy job, and Democrats do a crummy job of taking credit for things. If Trump were in the White House, this is the reality. If Trump were in the White House, this would be the greatest economy that ever existed, the best job growth ever existed. You would think that they were handing out gold bullion on the street corners. It would be that kind of PR pitch, that kind of self-promotion. And Democrats just don't do it. And it's one of those things where you go, I know all these people are disapproving of the economy sucks, all this stuff, because they're told constantly how bad things are. You remember when eggs were $9 a dozen? Oh my God, eggs are $9 a dozen. Joe Biden's fault. I just saw them at the store for $1. Anybody going, that's Joe Biden's fault? No. And as this stuff continues to drop, and look, I think we need to do a lot more to help move this along, but things are moving in the right direction because of the policies that are being moved on. We're investing in infrastructure. We're reshoring manufacturing, which we desperately need. And to prove this, I happened to catch this American Conservative article. Yes, I do read the American Conservative website because I want to know what the other side's saying. They evidently have come around to what I've been saying for how long I've been doing this show? Oh yeah, 18 years now. They've now finally, the epiphany, the dawn, that maybe deindustrialization was a bad thing. Maybe the post-industrial economy of white shirts in corner offices and paper shuffling, maybe not such a great idea. And as they say, 40 plus years of outsourcing has left the nation's industrial engine rusted. Can't disagree with that. This article says, look, foreign dependence has jeopardized our defense. It's jeopardized our innovation, and it's harmed our living standards. No, really? Who's been saying that for 18 years now? Oh yeah, I have. And others have been saying it a lot longer. Look, I'm not Magellan discovering new things either. But when you give away your manufacturing base, it's not like we lost it. It's not like they outcompeted us. We got a bunch of rich people who said, hey, we can make more money overseas. We can profit mightily and create more of us. And of course, you poor working schlubs, you're going to have to be retrained. And as they point out in this article, the financial sector did well. And as they say, China became the industrial superpower, the 21st century arsenal of autocracy. Now remember, our manufacturing prowess, go back to World War II, the arsenal of democracy. We handed that over to the Chinese because they now have the world's largest shipbuilding industry. They've got a fleet that we can't match. They point out in the article that if we got into a missile war, we got like a week's worth, and then it's going to take us about 2 years to produce what we need. We're that heavily dependent. And they point out that, China has moved ahead of us in 37 out of 44 critical and emerging science and technology fields. There was this report put out by the U.S. State Department and Special Competitive Study that said, hey, we're not competitive. What we are doing, what we do really well, we complain. We complain like nobody's business. We get in other people's affairs like nobody's business. But we've given away our manufacturing. And this is something working class people have known for years because it was them who took it on the chin. And, they said, look, this post-industrial economy, the myth that rationalized U.S. deindustrialization, it was bad. This is the American conservative. Conservatives were out in front pushing this. The neoliberals were there too, the Clintonites and them. But what we saw was, because the rich wanted to get richer, because we were sold on Wall Street more than Main Street, we lost our manufacturing. And as I've been saying for years, and I think back to a former friend of mine who was a congressman. He worked as a suit maker, and he used to tell the story about how one of his friends invented a machine that used to make the semiconductor chips. by using one of the sewing machines. That in his garage, he was tinkering around with an old machine. You know, innovation, where innovation happens. You happen to have this stuff, you're just playing around with it because you're using it all day at work and you thought of some new way of using it. That's gone. We don't do those things anymore. People don't have those skills anymore. And as they point out in the article, once we lost this manufacturing prowess, once we were no longer the arsenal of democracy and the leader of industrial production in the world, skills started to wane. And this is what I was having this conversation 18 years ago, saying, look, as we lose all these jobs and we lose the manufacturing capacity, as we lose machinists, as we lose the people who can take a chunk of steel and turn it into whatever you want, as those people retire and die off and there's no generation learning from those people, we lose the skill. And you're no more than 2 generations away from it being all gone. Hello, here we are. They point out in the article that, who knew there was a direct link between having the shop floor and the engineers right in the same place? Who knew? Who knew that was important? To have people who knew how the widgets worked and then went home into their garage and tinkered with them. This is my problem with doing away with tinkering. And a big problem I have with the John Deeres of the world and our defense contractors who don't let you fix anything because everything inside of it is proprietary. And while we were trying to figure out how we're going to develop the next gig economy widget, the next delivery app, or the next social media algorithm to get people to get hooked on watching whatever nonsense you're shoving before their eyes, countries like China and India were talking about, hey, how do we produce? And they went in and they talked about the number of things that we created. Solar photovoltaic cells, heavy castings and forgings, machine tools, permanent magnets, rare earth element refining, LED manufacturing, rechargeable batteries, semiconductors, liquid crystal displays, precision glass, fiber optic components, all of this stuff we created. And the Chinese now dominate. And look, the experiment of deindustrialization and the post-industrial economy is a failure. Because as they point out, who knew that that blue collar worker down at the factory had not just economic, losing those jobs didn't just have economic ramifications, also had national security ramifications. If you don't produce, you can't ramp it up. And this is where I come back to. I like what Biden has been doing, reshoring some manufacturing. Do I think we need a Marshall Plan to move us faster? Absolutely. We need to redo our grid. We need massive amounts of investment. Not just the 1.2 trillion that we've got now. We need massive investments. Like we're going to war. Because guess what? That's how the Chinese see it. And until we get our heads out of the sand, we're going to keep losing. So drop the red hat, drop the blue hat. It's time to pick up a hard hat and get back to work. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1934. That was the day the Lucas County Sheriff ordered an attack on thousands of electric auto light strikers and unemployed league supporters, touching off the 6-day Battle of Toledo. The Toledo auto light strike was one of 3 historic strikes of 1934 that turned the tide favorably toward industrial organizing. The auto light company had granted a wage increase, but reneged on promises of a first contract that included seniority rights, a closed shop, and more. Workers walked off the job in mid-April. As the strike was about to collapse, unemployed league forces, organized by A.G. Musty's American Workers' Party, joined picket lines in support. When legal wrangling failed to subdue the strike, scabs and deputized specials were amassed. And on this day, the picket lines grew to as many as 10,000. Deputies began arresting strike leaders and attacking picketers with fire hoses, tear, and vomit gas. Historian Brian Palmer describes the scene this way. Angry workers laid siege to the factory. 1,500 strikebreakers were imprisoned. The scene was one of almost medieval tumult. Windows were smashed with stones and bricks, many of them launched from giant slingshots improvised from rubber inner tubes. When every window in the factory had been smashed, one striker shouted, "Now you have your open shop." The next day, 900 Ohio National Guardsmen arrived on the scene. Women jeered the landing of the Marines, while soapboxers, many of them veterans, sporting First World War medals, offered impromptu lectures on how the troops were breaking the strike. The strikers' ranks faced a hail of Guardsmen bullets, which left 2 dead and scores wounded. The battle raged on until the end of May, when it was clear a general strike was imminent. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
If poobahs of the National Democratic Party wonder why working-class families, which once formed the party's solid base of political support, have gone astray, they might ponder the awful message they're sending by constantly smooching Senator Joe Manchin's tail. The multimillionaire West Virginia coal baron and anti-democratic Democrat is demanding that a massively polluting pipeline named Mountain Valley be rammed through rivers, watersheds, national parks, and down the throats of the people of West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina. Why? Money. The senator's fossil fuel funders, who own the project, want the federal government to mandate construction of their corporate boondoggle. For a decade, gutsy grassroots groups have rebelled and defeated these Wall Street profiteers, and the people of this Appalachian region are still adamantly opposed. But here comes Biden to rescue Manchin and his fossil fuelers with a dirty backroom deal overruling the will of the people. Proclaiming that he wants to advance America's conversion from fossil fuels to renewable energy, Biden is pushing a bill to make it easier and faster to get federal approval for new energy projects. Fine. But his bill specifically greases the skids for more fossil fuel projects. And guess which one is the first in line for quick approval? Yes, Brother Joe Manchin's Mountain Valley Pipeline. Pumping frack gas through 3 states would produce a mess of leaks and spills, but the project would also emit some 40 million metric tons of planet-warming gas a year, equivalent to the annual pollution of 10 coal plants. As the Natural Resources Defense Council puts it, we won't build the clean energy economy of the future by doubling down on the dirty fuels of the past. This is Jim Hightower saying, for information and action on this raw deal, connect with Appalachian Mountain Advocates, appvoices.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I'm sure everyone saw the 60 Minutes piece on the Pentagon, and I think the graphic that they had at the very beginning was perfect. You had the Pentagon with a giant screw right through the middle of it with a price tag on it saying price gouging. Because when you look at the fact that the number the guy gave out, when they negotiate these contracts for things that we need, they negotiate in a nice, healthy profit. 12 to 15% seems very reasonable. But the guy said they're taking about 40% now. When you look at the fact that our $842 billion budget, half of it is going to defense contractors, this might be something we should be talking about with this whole debt ceiling thing. If you really want to start cutting stuff, maybe the profits to these handful of defense contractors, maybe we could put that on the table. Just a thought. But here to share some thoughts on, well, the 60 Minutes piece and really what it says and what it means for the direction of our country and policy-wise what we need to be doing. So I've asked my good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, good to be with you.
So the 60 Minutes piece, we've been talking about this stuff for years. I don't think there's anything new in it. We've all heard about the $300 or $400 toilet seat or the $500 hammer. But this kind of puts some new stuff on it. The fact that We went from 51 defense contractors down to just 5 over a very short period of time. And that was a policy choice that I think we can undo.
Yeah. Yeah. It was, and it's indicative of a lot of what we see in the overall economy, right? There's a lot of concentration, monopolistic behavior. And when there are few participants in the market, they control more of the juice, right? Which means they can set the prices and, and there's not the competitive pressures that otherwise would fall on them. And I guess the thing that really bugs me about this, Rick, is that, we're at a time in our nation's history, I think, where in so many ways, we need to be doubling down on our national security capabilities, right? Our ability to produce munitions, to produce rockets. The burn rate of rockets is thousands per day, and we can only make thousands per month, basically, right? And if we want to gear up to provide a credible deterrence to China, and there was just this war game that was done, if there's a Taiwan conflict and the US would run out of missiles in like a week or something like that. So we have all this spending, but we have like hardly any of this capability. And so it's like, and you're right, it's kind of like a lot of it goes either to wasteful programs or gets caught up in this monopolistic behavior that has resulted in price gouging. And so I do think that we need to examine it. And even with some of the savings of that, you could apply to the stuff that we need to do from a national security basis, that we really need to do to ramp up our capabilities.
I keep asking who's going to be and I've been asking this for a couple of decades now, who's going to be this generation's Teddy Roosevelt, a trust buster, going to break up some of these monopolies? Who's going to be this generation's Harry Truman, to go after the war profiteers and hold people accountable? And I'm sadly, I'm not seeing it enough. I think this should be a national outcry. I know we're all concerned about who goes to what bathroom and what beer people drink or don't drink. I know we've got our important issues, but this seems kind of important too.
Yeah, it's more than important. I mean, one of the foundations of everything we take for granted as Americans is our ability to have a credible national defense. And it's served us well, I think, in World War II and since that time. And, we've had our ups and downs, but having that is important. And when you see, when you see what's happening today, it's frustrating. And I guess this is the thing about it. It's like, as you've indicated, and particularly on the issues we talk about on trade, like this isn't new. I mean, who first raised the serious concerns about the military-industrial complex?
Eisenhower.
Dwight Eisenhower in the 1950s. And so we've had a lot of time to consider this and to get it right, but we're still not there, Rick. Yeah.
No, I mean, I agree with Eisenhower. For every gun, every missile, those are people who hunger and aren't fed, children who don't get education or health care. I mean, it's all of those things. These are priorities that are misplaced, especially when. And this is where I get just angry beyond belief, especially when you have these corporations and these wealthy folks who are gouging us in a time of crisis. I mean, this is the part that just blows my mind, and why we put up with it. And I don't think we know enough about it. I don't think there are enough 60-minute pieces like this, because as you've said, I've been talking about this kind of stuff for years. I've been talking about deindustrialization for years. I've been talking about, China's rise by taking over our manufacturing prowess. And, you tell people, and they look at you like you got a third head.
Yeah, that's right. And look, we've all seen this as consumers, how our erosion of industrial capabilities has impacted us. We saw that during the pandemic when you had a hard time getting toilet paper or, personal protective equipment or semiconductors or a lot of stuff. And again, we take for granted that we have incredible national security capability. And we've been very fortunate that we've avoided large-scale conflicts or the conflicts we have entered into have been on our own terms. But if we we have to have the capacity to be able to do that. And despite all of that spending on defense, it doesn't exist. I mean, that war game with respect to Taiwan showed it, that like we'd run out of missiles in a week, and it's like, where'd all this spending go?
Yeah.
So yeah, we got to do something about it.
Well,
Right.
it went into billionaires' pockets. I mean, we know
That's
where
right.
a lot of it went.
Yeah.
That Office of Waste, Fraud, of Abuse that people talk about, I think a big part of it is in our defense industry. And look, I'm a Teddy Roosevelt kind of guy. I believe you walk softly, carry a big stick. I want to have a strong military. I want them to have everything that they need. Maybe not everything that they want, but what they need, they should have to keep our shores safe. But this is crazy. And now I look at China as I was just talking a moment ago about this American conservative piece about the post-industrial economy failing, like it's some kind of great epiphany. This has been 40 years in the making. This has been a situation where we didn't lose our manufacturing capacity. We gave it away, and we gave it away for a handful of people to get wealthier. And what I found interesting is as they were going through their realization of how bad this is, of how fast we lose skills, how fast we lose innovation, how fast we lose the ability to make the next widget or whatnot, or machine or technological advancement, and how now we're kind of screwed in this moment.
Yeah. And wait, and I'm saying this kind of rhetorically. Yeah, what publication was that in again, Rick?
The American Conservative. I mean, this is where we can take off our red hats and blue hats and pick up a hard hat, because we got a lot of work to do. When they pointed out that
right.
China now leads in 37 of 44 critical and emerging science and technology fields. Remember, we're number one. I thought, my finger, number one, chest thumping. We're number one, Scott, except in 37 out of 44 emerging science and technology fields.
Yeah, and it's no accident. I mean that this is happening, and I thought that piece was very well argued, very well written, and I think that there is this growing consensus that neoliberalism, free trade agreements, deindustrialization, financialization, this all went too far, and I think you can add concentration of industry to that as well, and that it's produced this really, really vulnerable situation for the United States, and I guess this is the danger, is that we've done some things, like we've done this piece with respect to trying to rebuild the semiconductor industry in the United States, or to invest in our infrastructure, or to jumpstart some clean energy manufacturing. But that is the tip of the iceberg. That is the tip of the iceberg. There's so much out there where there is this lack of capacity, and it's gonna flare up a lot, and we're gonna see it in medicines. In fact, we already have. We've saw it in semiconductor. We can see it in other microelectronics, and as it moves ahead, we're going to see it with respect to critical minerals that are needed for the batteries for electric vehicles, and then the list just goes on and on and on and on. And unless we have a strategy and say we want to make things here, what the market is going to give us is 1,000 new dollar stores a year, which is not going to win a war for us, or not going to cure cancer, or not going to create middle class jobs in this country. And so we need to, this industrial policy, we're at the very beginning of this, but it has to be much deeper, much broader, and sustained. And I'm glad that we've started down this road, but we shouldn't pretend like we've completely changed the game for manufacturing yet.
No, I think we've just awakened. You and I have had conversations for years that we need to have, and I've been saying for years that we need to have a Marshall Plan size, program to reshore manufacturing and upgrade our capacity to not just defend ourselves, but to supply ourselves. You talked about pharmaceuticals. We've got a neighbor who's battling cancer, not able to get the medicines that they need because who knows where they're made or where they're sourced or any of this stuff, because we've outsourced, we've given all that stuff away, and literally people are going to die because of
it. They will. And you've seen rationing, you've seen shortages. I mean, I have a prescription for a product that totally has to do it's not a life-threatening condition or anything like that, but for the past 6 months, it's been on back order almost every time, and it's taken weeks and weeks and weeks to get. And many people are experiencing this, and particularly in some of these cancer drugs as well. And there's a lot of reasons for them, but one of it is that fundamentally we don't make enough of the active pharmaceutical ingredients, enough of the compounds that go into that, or have enough of the manufacturing capacity to do it. And all of that like migrated to China, to India, to other countries. And we need to start restoring this. And again, there is some realization of this. And I've seen like good work that's going on in like Richmond, Virginia, in that area, in some other places. But we're just at the very beginning of these, and they're able to address one or two medicines and not the hundreds of medicines that are out there that we need to take care of. But this is again where we need an industrial policy. We need to say we're going to make this stuff here, and we're going to get some capital to put some factories here. We're going to have the right kind of incentives, including developing a government market, Buy America. Like, you know, if you're on Medicare or you're in the veterans program, and we're paying for prescriptions, those need to be sourced from the United States of America, and to utilize that as a lever for the pharmaceutical companies and the other companies involved in the supply chain to move this back to the United States as quickly as they can.
Yeah, but as much, this is my problem, Scott. Should we have to have legislation? Should we have to have policies stuck into this stuff to say take care of your home? I mean, you know, I think back to, you know, I guess I'm getting older, but you know, the whole flag waving patriotic thing was internalized. You thought about home first. You wanted to help overseas. You wanted to help other places, but home, that's what you took care of first. You didn't need to be recognized for doing the right thing, and ensuring that where your home base is taken care of. I guess I'm still struggling with this idea that, oh yeah, we're going to screw over entire towns and communities and move a factory halfway across the world because I can make a penny or two more. I'm still struggling with that.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the dilemmas we've seen with the version of capitalism that we have. And it's not a stakeholder capitalism. It's totally based on weighted towards shareholders, and it's based on a theory, right, that conservative economists had at the time, and that unfortunately the markets and corporate leaders abide by. And it's also this idea that they're still willing to wrap themselves in the flag, you know, in advertising and when it's convenient for them. But yeah, they would completely, totally, as you indicated, Rick, shut a factory down, send it overseas, not worry about any of the other impacts on communities, national security. And unfortunately, under the law, they can do that at virtually no cost now. Like, there's not much of a penalty for moving factories overseas. Or, you know, what do you do with the workers? They're not really responsible for having to clean up that mess in many occasions. And so unfortunately, we do have to do a lot of this through policy, through legislation, through regulation, to bring it back here. And again, we're seeing some results, but it took 40 years to get into this mess. We're not going to turn around in 4 years, but I think we've at least paused a lot of this, not all of it, but a lot of it. And we're seeing some signs that, yeah, at least some folks get it and are bringing stuff back to the United States.
I saw a video clip of Bob Lighthizer testifying. And he was saying, look, one of the greatest things you can possibly do for U.S. manufacturing, when I've talked to someone who doesn't believe there's a serious threat, I'm always like, oh, you must have investments in China. And he's saying, look, we need to remove the trade status, the permanent normal trade relations that we have, the trade status with China, and we need to do it now.
Yeah, I completely agree with the former trade ambassador, with Bob Lighthizer. I mean, he's been around these issues for a long time, and he may be a Republican who worked in the Trump administration, but he's also, in my humble opinion, been, along with Catherine Tai, the best trade representatives we've had, because they are like, our goal is not to negotiate free trade agreements. It's actually to bring jobs back to the United States and to use our trade policy to do that. And I think both of them agree. that we got to do that. But Lighthizer is right. We should not have permanent trade relations for China. What the hell have they done to deserve it? Nothing. And they violate every agreement they make with us. They poke our eye on a lot of different issues. And we have this massive trade imbalance, and there's no indication that they're ever going to change. And so, having this is a gift to Beijing, and there ought to be strings attached. There ought to be totally strings attached to it. And the only way we do that is by repealing permanent normal trade relations and conditioning it on China playing by the rules.
Yeah, but Scott, we won't get our cheap stuff from Walmart.
Well, trust me, Walmart will find other ways to make a dollar, and they already are. And I guess this is the thing: is that and this is why Lighthizer is right about this. The tariffs that were put on in the Trump administration. There's a lot of criticism about it, but fundamentally, in one important way, they have worked. The category of products, and by the way, it's only like a third of the products coming in the United States, and most of them aren't like consumer products. Okay, they're like intermediate goods, we would call them. But the trade deficit on those covered products has dropped dramatically since those tariffs have been in effect. And some of that work has come to the United States. Some of it's gone to our allies. Some of it's gone to other countries, but it's not in China anymore,
yeah.
which is very important. Whereas the trade balance on the other goods that aren't subject to the tariffs is just as bad as it always was. So the lesson there, tariffs work. They can adjust where our imports are coming from. And we should look at that very carefully as we move ahead and consider our next moves.
Yeah, it was one of the things that I was 100% behind Trump on, and the Trump administration wanted him to go even further. Would have been better if they'd had an actual plan after that. But I was 100% on board with the tariffs. Last question I've got for you. I now see Elon Musk moving vehicles that were supposed to be made for domestic production, domestic consumption in China. Evidently, there's talk of them going to Canada. How soon do they come here?
Yeah, I hope never. I mean, this really burns me up because, he put this factory in Shanghai and said, well, this is the only way I can sell in China, and that's all I'm going to do. And again, we have seen this. So many companies do this. So many guys say, oh, we're just moving to China to sell to that market. And then, a few years later, they're like, you know what? It's too good to be true. So let's bring them back to the United States, and we ought to slap punitive tariffs on any vehicle coming from China, just because there is no level playing field there, Rick. There's no level playing field at all for cars coming from the United States, and they should not get here. And shame on Canada. Shame on Canada too. If a bunch of them end up there. That's not the way this is supposed to turn out. And Elon Musk just has really screwed North American workers over.
This is where the whole idea of tearing down borders for capital and goods was a horrible idea in my view. I've got some people who disagree with me, but I think when we tore down borders for capital and for products, things went straight off the cliff, and the working class in all countries ended up taking it on the chin. It's just, I have a huge problem with it.
Yeah, we need to get back to that worker-centered trade policy that's not just blinded by a philosophy of free trade agreements, and do what's right. And a lot of times, honestly, that includes tariffs.
Yep. Do what's
totally
right.
Does.
Simple stuff. Do what's right. Scott, I appreciate the time as always. Good stuff. I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Can't wait. Look forward to it, Rick. Thank you.
Want to hear your thoughts? Should we be reshoring manufacturing? Should we be fighting for this? And do we have the elected officials who are going to do it? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2003. That was the day that the U.S. Senate approved more than $300 billion in tax cuts over the next decade. The cuts barely passed. Vice President Dick Cheney cast the deciding vote 51-50. Starting in 2001, President George W. Bush proposed and pushed for a series of drastic tax cuts. The administration promised the changes would help to create jobs and grow the economy, but the results fell far short of that goal. 10 years after the massive tax cuts, the Washington Post ran a story analyzing their impact. The article stated, quote, "By any measure, the Bush tax cuts have benefited the wealthy more than the middle class. The top 20% of earners received 73% of the tax relief. The bottom 20% only received 1%. Coupled with spending on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the tax cuts sent the national debt soaring. And those promised jobs, they never materialized. 2001 to 2007 marked the worst period of job growth since the 1950s. Then, in 2008, the recession wiped out 8 million jobs. Many of the Bush tax cuts were designed to sunset or expire after so many years. Yet, when it came time for the cuts to end in 2010, Republicans in Congress fought to keep them going. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka declared, "It is absolutely insane that in these tough economic times, some people want to continue George W. Bush's tax giveaways to millionaires. Working families are losing their jobs, their benefits, and their homes. They are the ones who need help." The Bush tax cuts finally expired in 2013, although new legislation repackaged and continued many of them. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So the governor of South Carolina, Henry McMaster, evidently Henry was talking before the state's GOP convention over the weekend and had a little quip. You know, got to get that dig in there against Democrats. He said, "I look forward to the day that Democrats are so rare, we have to hunt them with dogs." Yeah. No, what's interesting, South Carolina, probably the majority of the Democratic Party, they're black folks. They're people of color. I don't know. South Carolina's history as being the kind of state that it is seems like dog whistle politic, doesn't it? Seems like inciting, at least at the minimum, inciting some political violence. Talking to the good old boys, we get to go get them with our dogs. I got a problem with that. Just do. And now his excuse was, "Oh shucks, boy, y'all know he was just a kidding." No one knows you were just kidding. And the thing is the more this kind of thing goes unchallenged, the more these good old boy jokes, they're not jokes. The more the white supremacy and the Nazi mentality is allowed to fester, the more crazy stuff we have. Last night, for instance, somebody was driving a U-Haul truck, drove into Lafayette Square near the White House. Nazi paraphernalia in the cab. So it got me thinking. I'm like, geez, you see all this terrorism going on. You see all this stuff that white supremacists and Nazis are doing. I haven't heard much about Al Qaeda lately. It makes me wonder if they haven't outsourced terrorism to the white supremacists and the Nazis. Maybe they work cheaper. I don't know. But this is one of those moments where you go, maybe we need to start cracking down on domestic terrorism. Maybe we need to start holding some of these groups accountable. No, couldn't do that because we don't have a cute little catchphrase like Islamo-fascist terrorism stuff. Yeah, we do. It's called the Republican Party. And next election cycle, maybe start thinking about throwing the bums out. I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
These states essentially agreed to take less water from the Colorado River.
Western states reach landmark agreement to stave off multi-decade drought crisis. World's lakes are shrinking due to human overuse and climate change. Plus,
last year's election in November changed everything.
Minnesota legislature poised to enact landmark environment and climate legislation.
All of those landmarks and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
It is the #1 challenge in the world, a civilizational challenge unprecedented in scale and scope. And it is really striking that as we begin the official 2024 campaign, this issue, the most important one, the central civilizational challenge of our time, is utterly and completely absent and ignored from all Republican political campaign discourse.
Mission accomplished. This is your Green News Report.
Republicans don't care. Truly do not care if we melt the earth.
Okay, Desi Doyen, big news. We've been talking about this now for a few months, the water wars, if you will, out west. Now, maybe a truce?
Maybe. The Colorado River Basin states have agreed to cuts in water use to prevent the river from running dry amid an historic mega drought, the Bureau of Reclamation announced on Monday. California, Arizona, and Nevada have agreed to cut back on river water use by 13% over the next 3 years. That will be split up among farmers, tribes, and cities in exchange for more than $1 billion in compensation from the federal government, funded by the Inflation Reduction Act.
So if you give me money, then I won't drink water?
No, if you give me money, then I won't plant these really expensive, thirsty crops.
Oh.
Because remember, agriculture is the primary user of the Colorado River.
Good point.
The cuts are necessary to preserve the operation of rapidly declining western reservoirs, Lake Mead and Lake Powell. If finalized after a federal environmental review, this short-term deal would bridge the gap until the really difficult negotiations of allocating what is left of the Colorado River, which are set to start in 2026.
So this gets us through to 2026, at least. That's good. And all of this made possible, really, because we had a really wet winter out here for a change in California.
It certainly helped a lot for this negotiation, but it's not going to last much longer.
Okay, Little Miss Negative.
In Colorado, despite the ongoing mega drought, a new analysis shows that fossil fuel companies in the state actually doubled their withdrawals of the state's freshwater resources for fracking over the last 10 years. And that even as oil and gas production declined in the state. Data obtained by nonprofit group Frack Tracker Alliance also found that Colorado's drillers generated enough wastewater to supply their own fracking operations without draining the state's precious freshwater resources.
They just don't care.
Globally, the world's lakes are shrinking. A new study found that nearly 2,000 of the world's largest lakes have shrunk by trillions of gallons of water per year since 1992. The researchers say the decline of lakes is primarily attributable to human overuse and human-caused climate change, intensifying drought and shifting rainfall patterns. Even in regions seeing more extreme rainfall, the drier, hotter atmosphere generated by global warming is sucking up even more water through evaporation. Competition for declining lake water has major implications for agriculture, power plants, and drinking water around the world.
So let the water wars continue, I guess.
But some good news, the Environmental Protection Agency has moved to close a loophole that exempted hundreds of toxic coal ash waste dumps around the nation from clean water regulations. For the first time, utility companies would be forced to clean up toxic coal ash waste generated by burning coal for electricity. Studies have shown coal ash waste impoundments are leaching toxic heavy metals into groundwater supplies. The EPA also proposed new rules to crack down on polluted wastewater from coal-burning power plants that is dumped into rivers. Finally, Minnesota lawmakers have agreed to enact historic environment and climate legislation that invests more than $2 billion to decarbonize the state and accelerate its clean energy transition. It also addresses environmental justice and includes the toughest regulations on PFAS forever chemicals in the country. The funding will go to solarize schools and public buildings, electrify homes, incentivize electric vehicles, build an EV charging network, and more. Here's Ellen Anderson, a former state legislator who now heads the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy.
It's the most transformational year we've had in climate and energy policy. It's a game-changing year that we're having at the state capitol in terms of our approach to climate and energy and what we're doing to move our state forward dramatically.
It's amazing what you can do when you get rid of gerrymandering and the people get to vote for who they want and they end up voting for Democrats and a whole bunch of stuff gets fixed. Imagine that.
Are you tired of think tank approved corporate news and commentary? Are you tired of CEOs telling you what to think, who to hate, and who to vote for? Well, welcome to the Rick Smith Show. We don't take orders from some boardroom, and we don't do focus groups or talking points. We don't work for them, and we never will. I'm Rick Smith, and I work for you. Join us daily at thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast and never miss a minute.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So as we tick down the days to the default, which I got to tell you, I think is going to happen. The more and more I listen to Republicans, the more I listen to Matt Gaetz, the more I think they truly do want to shoot the hostage. And if you saw the quote today out of Matt Gaetz, he said, I think my conservative colleagues, for the most part, support limit, save, grow, and they don't feel like they should negotiate with our hostage. Now, again, you go, well, you talking about Joe Biden. No, he's not talking about Biden. He's talking about all of us, the entire country. We're the hostage because we're the ones who are going to see all of the negative ramifications that are going to come from a default, all the pain, all the struggle, the recession that could be triggered by this. You and me, working people, we're the ones getting stiffed. And here to share some thoughts on the hostage situation, and if there really are as many Republicans who want to shoot us as I imagine. I've asked our good friend Craig Harrington to come talk with us. Craig is Media Matters Research Director. You can check out their website, MediaMatters.org. Craig, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, Rick, thank you for having me on again.
So he said the quiet part out loud. We're hostages. Yeah. Surprised?
Yeah, I actually was a little bit surprised to see that rhetoric coming out of the Republican caucus. And, if you saw, we at Media Matters, we published a newspaper study reviewing coverage of the debt ceiling crisis in the first half of this month earlier today. And I did a tweet thread of some of the highlights of that study. And one of the things that I pointed out is that the American public deserves to know that the Republican plan for the debt ceiling negotiations is to shoot the hostage. Very clearly, their plan is either they will get what they are demanding, which is dramatic, shocking, devastating budget cuts across the federal government that would truly, truly harm tens of millions of Americans proximately and immediately through these budget cuts, or they'll destroy the entire global economy. So they'll either destroy the American safety net through the concessions they're demanding from Democrats, or they'll destroy the entire American and potentially global economies if they don't get the concessions that they're demanding from Democrats. But in both scenarios, they shoot the hostage.
Yeah,
that is the plan.
Exactly, you're right. In both scenarios, they get what they want, which is a working class that's struggling. Because look, if they do get the cuts that have been proposed, especially the ones by the Republican Study Committee, massive cuts, which I think would trigger a recession anyway, because you're going to pull all of this demand out of the economy. Basically, the bottom would fall out of spending, and we would have mass chaos, layoffs like crazy in either direction when you pull that kind of funding out of an economy like they're talking about.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've seen is, because the Republicans finally actually put together a plan of what their proposal was, $4.5 to $4.8 trillion worth of spending reductions. Analysts were finally able to put that together and figure out what it would mean. Now, one of the things that immediately came out of the White House Office for Management and Budget, and also an outside organization called the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, they did analyses of this, and the White House found that this would equate to a 22% cut across the board, including veterans and the defense budget. The Center on Budget and Policy Priorities did an independent analysis and came to a 23% average cut across the board. And then McCarthy when you present this and say McCarthy is planning to cut 1/5 away from the defense budget and 1/5 away from veterans over the next decade, McCarthy then scrambled and built a carve out so that you wouldn't actually affect military direct spending or veterans direct spending. And so the Center for American Progress did a secondary analysis of non-defense discretionary spending, also including veterans benefits in that defense spending, which has never been done before. And they said that if we did the same budget reductions that McCarthy is demanding, but we didn't touch the defense budget and we didn't touch the veterans budget, it would equate to an average of a 58% cut across the board for non-defense, non-veterans discretionary spending over the next 10 years. That means that more than half of the federal government outside of defense and veterans affairs would be denuded, defunded, dismantled over the next 10 years. That is not what any American person, what any American voted for in the midterms. That is not what the public wants. These are deeply unpopular. These are legislative proposals that Republicans could never enact through regular order. And when they had a trifecta, when they had the presidency and the Congress, they didn't even think about this stuff in 2017. They only demand these devastating cuts when Democrats are in power. And the media does, frankly, a pretty poor job of explaining those stakes and the facts to the public when we're faced with this.
Or just, how important, government spending overall is. I mean, we've been trained for decades, to think that, we need to slash and burn. And we've heard the Grover Norquist, we need, the government's so small we can drag it in the bathtub and drown it. At some point, you got to go educate people on what exactly government spending does. Are we really going to could do all of the horrible things that they want? And the answer is no, we're not that society yet. Maybe someday down the road, we'll starve children and kick veterans to the curb on purpose. But I don't think we're there yet.
Well, this is the thing, even during the Trump era, when we saw the sort of revitalization of the extreme right wing in the United States, we did not see demands for these kind of cuts. What we're seeing from people on the left and the right is a public demand for the government to do more, to be more involved, and to be more forthcoming with resources for the American public. Some parts of the public, particularly on the far right, want to see resources taken away from other groups who mostly they consider immigrants, but they want to see non-white populations and non-native born populations have resources taken away from them, but they don't want to give up resources themselves. Overwhelmingly, when this is put to the public, they say, no, we actually don't have a spending problem. If we have a spending problem in any way, it's that we don't spend enough. And I strongly encourage, you can use fiscal tools that are put together by conservative outlets. You can put together fiscal tools that are from non-aligned outlets. You can find a budget calculator online with 15, 20 seconds of Googling, and you can go through and point for point do your own deficit and budget reduction plans. And what you'll find is there is a lot of stuff that you do not want to cut.
Yeah, no.
And the big flashy things that people think they're going to cut and save money, like cutting NASA, cutting foreign aid, cutting the F-35 fighter jet program, that is a drop in the bucket. The problem isn't that we are overspending. We don't have a spending problem. That's what Republicans have said for years, and that's what the media has largely gone along with.
No, we've got a revenue problem.
We have a tax problem. That's right.
That's it.
We have a revenue problem. We don't tax enough, and that's where the money is.
No, I absolutely agree. I've been saying that for years. You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Craig Harrington. Craig is the research director over at Media Matters, MediaMatters.org, the website. Let's quick go to the phones. I got John on line 1 from Wisconsin. John, what's on your mind?
Well, I think this is my opinion. This is what this is all about. And this information is taken from the Harvard Business Review, which I would say is hardly a left-leaning study group. And these are quotes from a study that was, I believe, came out in March of this year. A booming labor market, exceptionally strong household balance sheet, keep spending high. Household net worth far higher than COVID for every single income. Firms are going strong, profitability to record highs, not surprising with the price gouging that's going on. Fast wage growth, consistently strong sales growth, firms are reluctant to turn to layoffs. And finally, and this is a very important part of this too, there is, and this is a quote, the absence of convincing systemic threats of inflation. So what this is about is, I think, the Republicans have been telling us for years now, ever since Biden got into office, the economy is terrible. Biden's making it worse. This just isn't the case. But it's to their advantage to make it terrible. And the best way to do that, you tell me. Not hard to figure out, is it?
No, and this is what I've been saying for a while. This is all about creating the recession that they have so wanted from the beginning. You're spot on,
Yep,
John. Craig, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, this is your caller is exactly right, and this is why Republicans use this negotiating tactic around the debt ceiling. This is how they game the conversation in the media. We wrote about this earlier today, like I said earlier, at MediaMatters.org. You can find this study beginning in 1995, when there was a Democratic president, but Republicans controlled Congress, and accelerating from 2011, when there was also a Democratic president, but Republicans controlled Congress. We started to see more and more use of this debt ceiling brinkmanship, where the extremist contingent of the Republican majority in the House or the Senate or both was threatening to drive the country into this brick wall if they couldn't get the policy demands that policies enacted that they were demanding. And all of those policies, all of them were depressive, were essentially intended to manufacture a recession. And what do you remember from the late 1990s? We remember the booming 90s. We remember Bill Clinton being popular because the economy was strong. Where were we in 2010? We were finally recovering from the Great Recession. And what did the Republicans do? They strapped a straitjacket to the economy to slow down economic growth, to grind the recovery from the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act to a halt through the Budget Control Act of 2011 and through sequestration. They used this because they hoped that it would help them win in 1996, and they failed. They hoped it would help them win in 2012, and they failed. And they hope that they can manufacture a recession in this economy right now so that they can win in 2024. This is not rocket science. They've done this before. They'll do it again. That's the reason Republicans didn't get rid of the debt ceiling in 2017 when Donald Trump was openly talking about what a nuisance this thing is. And maybe we should just get rid of it.
I'm with you. You got any other thoughts, John?
Yeah, the Republicans are now balking, of course, at paying for money that they've already authorized. It's already been spent. All we're doing is collecting our IOUs back. And about a quarter of those IOUs, a little thing that was $7 trillion or so, roughly 1/4 of the entire national debt put on in 4 years under Trump. Now they don't want to pay for it. Excuse me, what's wrong with this picture? These are guys that already voted for this stuff. I think what's got to happen is this. I really think that this has got to be put to a stop. And I think the best way to do it is for Biden to invoke Section 4, the 14th Amendment, the good faith and credit of the United States of America. Yes, it'll be taken to court. Yes, it'll probably go to the Supreme Court. And I really don't trust the 6 reactionary Federalist snakes that are in charge of the court at this point. But something's got to be done about this, because this kind of stuff has got to stop.
I'm with you,
Period.
John. I appreciate the call, John. Thanks so much. No, he's not wrong. I take it a little bit different, though, Craig. I mean, I look at the 6. How did he put it? Vipers in the court. I look at them as they're bought and paid for by corporate America. Corporate America doesn't want us to default. Corporate America doesn't want a recession. So the part of me goes, I think on this at least, having a bought and paid for Supreme Court might not be a horrible thing.
Yeah, it sort of reminds me of something that I heard from Neil deGrasse Tyson. I think this must have been a decade ago. He's been interviewed by The Daily Show or something. And he was a science advisor for the Bush administration, even though he himself identifies as fairly liberal. And I believe he's actually a registered Democrat. And he said the thing that you have to understand about these Republicans is they don't want to die poor. And so they're not actually going to advocate things that would destroy the economy because they don't want to die poor. They don't really believe in this stuff to the point that it makes them bleed. The problem is that that's not true necessarily anymore. It was certainly true that the Republicans didn't want to touch the stove, and that their media allies were not going to embolden them to the point of touching the stove. 10 years ago.
Yeah, but
or
they didn't
15
have
years ago.
Marjorie Trainwreck Green. They didn't have
Yeah.
Gates. They didn't have the cabal of crazy that's leading things right now. They
Yeah,
do.
I mean,
they want to shoot the hostage.
the number of Republicans in the House who are publicly available and supportive of just a clean debt ceiling lift, just doing what we've done 78 times in the past and just raising the debt ceiling. Like, how many can you think of today? In past iterations, there were dozens, maybe half a dozen, maybe a dozen. But now, is it even one? Is it five? You need 4 or 5 votes to join the Democratic discharge petition that is currently working through the House to just give a clean debt ceiling increase. And out of the 200 or so Republicans, are there 5? It remains to be seen. Now, like, does Harlan Crow, the now infamous benefactor of at least Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, does he want us to default on the national debt and destroy the value of all the currency that he's been hoarding like a dragon for decades? He probably would want to avoid that scenario. And so maybe if we do throw this to the Supreme Court, you'll see calmer minds prevail. But I think it's actually really interesting what your caller just brought up, and think about the conversation we're now having in public. Like the 3 words, mint the coin. You know what mint the coin means. In 2014, if I said mint the coin to you, Rick, would you have had any idea what I was talking about? If I mentioned Section 4 of the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, would anyone know what we were talking about? Look how far the Overton window has moved in the mainstream media conversation to the left on these issues. It's not an area where just the right extremism is prevailing. They are driving so far to the right that they're forcing corrective mechanism, particularly in mainstream press, and much more strongly in liberally aligned press, where the conversation is now just like to find a way to get away from this gimmick entirely. It kind of reminds you of the handful of people, just a small handful, who, when Merrick Garland was being blocked by Mitch McConnell, they said, Obama should just send him to the Supreme Court. Just have him show up to work on Monday. And if John Roberts wants to send him away, let John Roberts send him away. But like, Obama has received the advice and consent of the Senate, and they refuse to vote, but he can still appoint a Supreme Court justice, and he should just appoint him.
I remember that. And look, this is the important part of this. I've been saying this for a very long time, that Democrats don't seem to have a fight in them. If there's a street fight going on, they'll offer to hold your coat, but they're never going to ball up the digits and get in there and knock around. This is why I think Biden in this moment, if he does the thing I want him to do, will maybe push back on that Dick Cheney frame of, Democrats cave. It's what they do, because it's been learned behavior. We've allowed Republicans to hold the hostages and do all this stuff, and then we give in at the last minute. And again, as I said earlier, it's because Democrats care. They don't want to burn the house down. They don't want children to go hungry. They don't want seniors to have to eat cat food. They don't want all the horrible outcomes that are going to come, and they're dealing with people who are nihilists. They are willing to let people go hungry. They're willing to let the people that they take pictures with a flag behind them, be homeless. They don't care about you or me. That, to me, is the simple response to all of this.
Yeah, and it's interesting. There are 2 sort of historical precedents that I think are worth lingering on a little bit here. One of them is in 2011, who was the person who was negotiating with Mitch McConnell, negotiating it earnestly and in good faith to try to find a solution that would bring both sides to the table? The person who was leading the negotiations for the White House, was Joe Biden. He remembers how the Republicans gamed the media conversation and how right-wing media allies of those Republicans set the groundwork for the Obama administration to, frankly, lose that debt ceiling negotiation. Does he want to go through the same process again, having had the benefit of hindsight?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it doesn't seem, particularly from the media conversations that we can see, it doesn't seem that the White House is as eager to negotiate and as eager to come to the table as they were in 2011. No. And the point you made about how Democrats care, it goes back to the first time we saw the debt ceiling in the modern iteration really be used as a hostage-taking technique from the Republicans. And it was after the Republican Revolution of 1994. Did you know that in Congress today, there are more Democrats left over from the Republican Revolution than there are Republicans? They came in with these sweeping majorities during the Gingrich era, but once they lost the majority, those Republicans got the heck out. They weren't that interested in governing from the minority. They were there for the theatrics. They were there to get on TV. And then when they were no
money.
longer in power, when they were no longer in power, they got out. Meanwhile, those Democrats, they came here to work, and you do the work even when you're in the minority.
That's an excellent
and so
point.
There's a generation of people who've been working really hard, and who've been facing this Republican intransigence for years. And it's possible that there's just a lot of muscle memory built up now that the Democratic Party is better suited for this fight. And we certainly are seeing, you just look at media interviews, just look at MSNBC or CNN nightly, look at who's being quoted in the newspapers. You are seeing more and more Democrats saying, like, take this fight, use the 14th Amendment, mint the coin.
I hope so. Ball up the digits and get in there and knock around. That's simple. But Craig, I appreciate the time. Great stuff as always. Keep up the good work.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Rick.
Yeah, you as well. Our good friend Craig Harrington. Make sure you check out their website, MediaMatters.org, where he's the research director. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So evidently Ron DeSantis is going to be announcing his presidential bid on Wednesday. Going to do that on Twitter with Elon Musk sitting right next to him. So if you think Twitter is not a right-wing social media outlet, I don't know what to tell you. And I got a lot of my friends on the left going, no, we've got to stay and we've got to fight. I'm like, if you're paying Elon Musk a nickel, you're paying too much and you're part of the problem. It's time to abandon Twitter. Let it go. Just let it go. I know we got to stay in there and fight. Nope. Bunch of crazy people. And Musk has been the one who's done that. They've destroyed it. It's time to move on and find somewhere else where sanity may rule. Just my thoughts. Now, it's interesting. He's doing it on Twitter with Musk. Again, this is this free speech platform. Where the billionaire is holding his hand. I saw a report that said, this is kind of a slap in the face to Fox News. Because hey, that was supposed to be the center of conservative, the whole megaphone. This is now challenging that central tenet of conservative media, the F channel. That's interesting. And as its value has gone down, you kind of got to wonder, what's that going to mean for the F channel? Now, Trump's got his social media, the Truth Social, which President Biden and his advisors are not joining, evidently, which I don't blame them. Why? Why bother? Nothing good over there. Nothing but headaches. But I do find it interesting that he's not. Now, DeSantis evidently is getting together a bunch of business leaders to raise money, because you do what you got. You got to get your bundlers. And I see what he's doing to Disney. If you're a business owner, are you gonna saddle up with this guy after seeing all of the things that he's doing to Disney, which is one of the largest employers in his state? Really? Is thin-skinned and is really kind of awkward and goofy. I can't wait to see Musk and DeSantis sitting next to each other. Two of the most awkward human beings I think I've ever seen. To see them married next to each other, that in itself will be entertaining. That in itself will be well worth enduring listening to either of them talk. But this is the moment and the place we're in. So DeSantis is going to be in. Is he going to be the guy? I don't know. I do think it'll be interesting to watch Trump tear into him. I do think that will at least be entertaining. Say what you want about Trump. He's ruthless. Good luck, Ron. Quick break. Right back. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 2003. That was the day that the U.S. Senate approved more than $300 billion in tax cuts over the next decade. The cuts barely passed. Vice President Dick Cheney cast the deciding vote 51-50. Starting in 2001, President George W. Bush proposed and pushed for a series of drastic tax cuts. The administration promised the changes would help to create jobs and grow the economy, but the results fell far short of that goal. 10 years after the massive tax cuts, the Washington Post ran a story analyzing their impact. The article stated, quote, "By any measure, the Bush tax cuts have benefited the wealthy more than the middle class. The top 20% of earners received 73% of the tax relief. The bottom 20% only received 1%. Coupled with spending on wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, the tax cuts sent the national debt soaring. And those promised jobs, they never materialized. 2001 to 2007 marked the worst period of job growth since the 1950s. Then, in 2008, the recession wiped out 8 million jobs. Many of the Bush tax cuts were designed to sunset or expire after so many years. Yet, when it came time for the cuts to end in 2010, Republicans in Congress fought to keep them going. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka declared, "It is absolutely insane that in these tough economic times, some people want to continue George W. Bush's tax giveaways to millionaires. Working families are losing their jobs, their benefits, and their homes. They are the ones who need help." The Bush tax cuts finally expired in 2013, although new legislation repackaged and continued many of them. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
If poobahs of the National Democratic Party wonder why working class families, which once formed the party's solid base of political support, have gone astray, they might ponder the awful message they're sending by constantly smooching Senator Joe Manchin's tail. The multimillionaire West Virginia coal baron and anti-democratic Democrat is demanding that a massively polluting pipeline named Mountain Valley be rammed through rivers, watersheds, national parks, and down the throats of the people of West Virginia, Virginia, and North Carolina. Why? Money. The senator's fossil fuel funders, who own the project, want the federal government to mandate construction of their corporate boondoggle. For a decade, gutsy grassroots groups have rebelled and defeated these Wall Street profiteers, and the people of this Appalachian region are still adamantly opposed. But here comes Biden to rescue Manchin and his fossil fuelers with a dirty backroom deal overruling the will of the people. Proclaiming that he wants to advance America's conversion from fossil fuels to renewable energy, Biden is pushing a bill to make it easier and faster to get federal approval for new energy projects. Fine. But his bill specifically greases the skids for more fossil fuel projects. And guess which one is the first in line for quick approval? Yes, Brother Joe Manchin's Mountain Valley Pipeline. Pumping frack gas through 3 states would produce a mess of leaks and spills. But the project would also emit some 40 million metric tons of planet-warming gas a year, equivalent to the annual pollution of 10 coal plants. As the Natural Resources Defense Council puts it, we won't build the clean energy economy of the future by doubling down on the dirty fuels of the past. This is Jim Hightower saying, for information and action on this raw deal, connect with Appalachian Mountain Advocates, appvoices.org.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So when you look at the polling on the debt ceiling, they're saying 60% of people are saying, hey, we want to see things cut. And I think, as our guest earlier said, when you start talking about things to cut, and there are calculators out there to go, what would be your priority? Would you cut Social Security? Would you cut Medicaid? Would you cut, food stamps for children? Would you cut things for veterans? What would you cut? What are your priorities? The vast majority of people that I know who've gone through this find it very difficult to cut from people that they know. We're not even talking about raising revenue or doing any of those things. So I thought It'd be an interesting conversation to see in the state of Pennsylvania, in my neck of the woods, what would happen if we have a failure of Congress to do its job and raise the debt ceiling and fund the things that we've agreed that we need. What's it going to mean for Medicaid? What's it going to mean for food stamps? That's why I've asked Robin Stelly to come talk with us. Robin is the statewide organizer for the Pennsylvania Health Access Network, pahealthaccess.org, the website. We'll get links out on social media. You can take a look at that. Robin, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me here. Yeah, I come from Pennsylvania Health Access Network. We're one of the, probably the largest consumer advocacy organization that focuses on healthcare. And we want to make sure that Pennsylvanians have access to quality, affordable healthcare and equitable healthcare. The most important thing we do probably, though, is run a statewide consumer assistance program. And we just get thousands of calls, 10,000 calls a year from people who want to know, what do? I don't have insurance. What do? I got this letter from Medicaid, help. And we've enrolled over 10,000 individuals in Medicaid Marketplace, which is the penny.com coverage, and CHIP since 2013. And we work in local communities and all the way across the state. And it's because we have this helpline that we hear from people who use the programs that you're talking about, Medicaid, CHIP, the Affordable Care Act, health insurance plans. So we hear from them daily. We know what kind of value these plans bring to their lives. We know what would happen if they didn't have access to health care. We've been fighting in defense of Medicaid. We call it Medicaid expansion. It's the expansion of Medicaid to cover people who are not traditionally eligible for Medicaid. These are people who are able to work, don't have children, so they're not disabled. They're, like I just said, they don't have children, so they're not traditional Medicaid, eligible for Medicaid, but they are eligible for Medicaid expansion. And we know for a fact that this has saved lives. Being able to access doctors when you need it is a lifesaver. Yep. It's Medicaid expansion that would be targeted by all of what you're talking about around this latest flare-up of the debt ceiling.
So this was going to be my first question. Who would be hit hardest by a default? If money dries up, where does that go? I mean, you look at our tattered social safety net. Who are going to be the ones most harmed by this? Is it going to be our Republican friends in Congress? I seriously doubt it. Will it be their donors? Seriously doubt it. I think it's going to be the poor working people in my state and others that are at the margins already that this is going to harm the most.
Well, yes. Short answer, yes, because they're always the people that are harmed first. But longer answer is it's unthinkable, literally unthinkable. You cannot default. There's no way, and because once you do default, yes, those things are going to happen, like you're talking about. Medicare is going to have to say, you know what, we don't know when we're going to be able to pay you, doctor. And doctors are going to turn around and say, well, you know what, patient, I'm not sure I can take you because I don't know if I'm going to be paid or when I'm going to be paid. So that's going to explode in the face of people who are not traditionally marginalized, right? People who simply use Medicare are going to have a problem. Medicaid, absolutely. Interest rates are going to skyrocket. Jobs are going to disappear. This is would be cataclysmic. There's no way to overstate this. And so that's why it's such an effective weapon. Right. Because, and it isn't just people on the margins and what we think of as low-income people. This is Wall Street losing its mind next too, because they know this would be catastrophic for them. The McCarthy bill that the House passed is what would be most catastrophic or damaging to the people you're talking about, the people who rely on the most forward-facing part of Medicaid, and of course SNAP, because these are the programs that are going to be cut. In Pennsylvania alone, if the McCarthy bill were to become law, and it is not, but if it were, heaven forbid, that means 500,000 Pennsylvanians losing their health coverage. And that's through the attachment of work requirements to Medicaid, which would be a lot of taxpayer money thrown away. And the only thing we would end up with at the end of that complete tossing out the window of taxpayers' billions would be fewer people on Medicaid. Wouldn't it lead to more people working? Wouldn't it lead to more people getting the care they need? It would just lead to people off of the rolls of Medicaid, which is not what we need to pay hundreds of billions of dollars to do.
No, you're right. But what do you say to the person who goes, everyone should work? If you want, the old
everyone is working.
The old phrase of if you want to eat, you got to work.
Everyone is working.
Well,
I mean, that's what I said. It's a sham.
Okay.
This you have to work to get Medicaid is just a false premise. Everyone essentially who uses Medicaid is working if they are able to work. They are not working if they're not able to work, and they wouldn't be covered under Medicaid work requirements anyway. I think that their figure came out recently of something like 9%. It would mean 9% of people who use Medicaid might be pulled into, being punished with work requirements. And I'm sorry for the number of people who are going to be tossed off the rolls incorrectly due to paperwork errors, deadlines missed, all this kind of stuff, seasonal work where I worked for 3 months, then I didn't work for 3 months. Well, then what happens? All of that, all the people who are going to lose their coverage through those paths doesn't make up for the 9% that we're going to pull in.
No, I'm glad you framed it that way, that it's all just a scam. Because,
it's total scam.
Look, most people go, well, how can you be against work requirements? I'm not against, as long as there's a job. And if you're going to be having government be the employer of last resort, I'm okay with that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about putting a mandate in place and then going, go ahead, go find something that's not out there. Or as you point out.
And who's paying for it? Who's going to pay for this? It's not free.
Right.
Hiring people to track down people and say, file this and get this paper in, and if you didn't get the paper, let me send it again. All that it costs billions of dollars nationwide. In Pennsylvania, it's going to probably cost millions. And to do that, for what reason? They work. They're already working. All you're asking them to do is reprove that they're working. And if their paperwork gets lost, it's just money thrown away. And if they get kicked off of Medicaid because of a snafu, now you've hurt somebody. Yeah. You've taken away the care they need to stay healthy. And if they're not healthy, can they work? No.
Yeah, it all seems punitive to me. And it all seems...
It is. It's about one thing, driving down the rolls of Medicaid. That's all it's about. It has nothing to do with bringing back people to work. We know this because we've seen it work. They had it in Arizona and Arkansas. They had work requirements attached. Did nothing to drive up the number of people working. All it did was cost a lot of money to kick a lot of people off Medicaid. That's it. Yeah, that's all Medicaid work requirements do.
And you brought up the work requirements. I've been waiting for a golden oldie to come popping back up and drug testing to come back. Because if you remember that moronic, idiotic bit that they did, they spent millions of dollars to catch no one. I mean, literally, they were catching no one, but they were spending millions and millions of dollars just wasting money on testing that caught virtually no one. Because guess what? When you give poor people money, they generally use it on the things that they need, like food and shelter.
Insurance. Yep. If they qualify to buy insurance at penny.com, we have a report we just released that shows that people, if they were given a little bit more to help buy insurance at penny.com, they would buy better insurance, keeping themselves healthier.
You're listening
People
to the Rick
who are
Smith Show.
low income are smart. People who are low income know how to navigate a very difficult world out in front of them very, very well. They're smart. They are clever on top of that. And we just need to give them that boost to keep them afloat and let them live their lives.
It's tough to be poor in this country. You're listening to the Rick Smith Show here with Robin Stelly. Robin is the statewide organizer for the Pennsylvania Health Access Network, pahealthaccess.org, the website, if you want to check out the incredible work that they do. This is one of those moments where you go, I've had conservatives say, well, we're going to cut federal spending, but the states can pick this up. Can the state of Pennsylvania make up the difference?
Absolutely. 100% they cannot. Absolutely not. If you're talking about Medicaid expansion, the federal government right now pays 90% of that. So for $100 spent on Medicaid expansion, the federal government pays 90 of those dollars. To imagine that Pennsylvania would somehow be able to find money to pick up all the people that the federal government wants off the rolls is just ridiculous. There's no way they could possibly do it. Where would we get that money? The state of Pennsylvania doesn't print money like the federal government does. The federal government could do it. There's no problem here. No problem at all. This is all, it's made up out of whole cloth. We saw it when Obama was president. We didn't see it when Trump was president. We see it now when he blew $2 trillion hole in the deficit. Silence. But now when President Biden has a plan to reduce the deficit by $3 trillion, President Biden has a plan to reduce the deficit by $3 trillion. Now this thing happens. The debt ceiling nonsense happens. And the only way they'll be satisfied is if we make people on the margins suffer.
So this is a situation where, if you're President Biden, you're looking at any deal that you'll make with the devil is going to harm people and harm them badly. And I think, as you said, harm the people who are least able to shoulder it the worst. And if you allow it to default, then everyone is going to struggle and suffer because of it, and not just here, but probably globally. So he's kind of in a position where I think he's got to take a firm stand in this moment. And as I've been saying, I think once we default, you file under the 14th Amendment, you take it to the Supreme Court, and you pay the freaking bills, and we finally be done with this kind of a hostage crisis and not allow this to happen again.
So you're rolling the dice. That's a tough.
What choice do you have? Let me ask you. Hold on. Let me ask you, because you've laid this scenario out very, very well. If you're in that situation, don't you roll the dice, because there are no good options in this moment. There are no, we're going to cut all of these programs that Republicans say that they absolutely want, and default is going to be bad. What do you do?
I don't know. I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to pretend like I know. But right. I know I've been reading, and I know there's something called a short-term default, which doesn't sound great. The panic that would probably ensue would be difficult for people. Who knows where people would fall when they come to blame people for this kind of, like, who's to blame? Who's to blame? It's hard to know where they're going to put the blame, even though it's pretty obvious where the blame would lie. I don't know. I'm glad I'm not President Biden, but you would think to wait until the very, very last minute before he does something that's going to mean that people who cannot afford it will suffer the most. It really is unconscionable. To tighten up the work requirements with TANF and SNAP is just...
Doesn't it seem cruel? Doesn't it seem punitive?
Absolutely.
Doesn't it seem just mean-spirited? I mean, and this is where...
And it's not what America wants. America doesn't want this. Medicaid has a 75% approval rating in America. It has a plurality of approval with Democrats and Republicans and independents. We love Medicaid. We love Medicaid. 75% approval. What has 75% approval? I mean, vanilla ice cream doesn't have 75% approval. It's around the 50s. Ice cream has in the 80s, but vanilla ice cream can't touch Medicaid. People don't want people to suffer. It's just the facts. And when I talk to people on the helpline, and when I talk from the helpline, I know that they don't want to have to need help. But when they need help, they're thrilled it's there, and they want their lives to continue.
Yeah. So as
without
you're
having
talking
to
to people,
worry about.
Is this coming up? Is this a concern for people right now that you're dealing with?
Usually, if I'm talking to people, they are worried about, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? So our helpline, I'm not a helpline worker. Our helpline is the best in the state. They catch the people and they say, this is what we can do. This is what you can do. And then when I talk to them, I ask them, like, what was that like? What do you think? What if you didn't have Medicaid? And it's always the same. Medicaid has saved my life. The Affordable Care Act is a lifesaver. That word, lifesaver, that phrase, saved my life, I hear it all the time. So,
yeah,
I know, and they're not overstating it.
Yeah, this is one of the...
And to have them be worried about this, to have people have to go to bed at night worrying about whatever might happen next, that's the tip of the horrible iceberg. And then to go through with the cuts is just unconscionable.
Yeah, well, I think Matt Gaetz said it best today. People may want to do some of these things, but why would we deal with the hostage? Why would we deal with the hostages? Being you and me.
Was that a mistake? Was that like a slip of the tongue?
No, I
know he's not a genius, but is that what was that?
No, I truly believe that. Look, where I believe is that there are people in our Congress who want to touch the hot thing. They want to push the button. They want to default. They want the chaos. My view on this is not just that the Republicans are mean-spirited and hate social programs. They want and need a recession for 2024. This, to me, is very calculated. This is very well planned out. They know what they're going to do, and it's all about causing the chaos that they've been telling us is going on. They've been saying recession since Joe Biden put his hand on the Bible. And they need that in 2024. So going to be an interesting cycle.
Can I just make one point about that in case anybody is sitting around thinking, I can't get my head around that? you can get your head around it. All you have to think about is what happened at the beginning of the COVID emergency. Remember the COVID emergency?
Yeah.
That was a relatively small disruption compared to what a default would be. And the only difference between the two, other than scale, is this. In the COVID emergency, the federal government was able to step in. Remember the checks they sent out?
Yeah.
Remember essential services had to stay in place? The federal government could step in. If we're talking default, the federal government cannot step in. And now, do you want to go through that a COVID-like emergency economically without a backstop of the federal government?
Ask any conservative. The answer is yes, Robin. Ask most conservatives. The answer is yes. Government shouldn't do anything. Pat Toomey
if they want to be able to pay their mortgages, because interest rates are going to skyrocket. If you want to be able to pay your mortgage, I know there are plenty of people all throughout this political spectrum who have mortgages, and they want to be able to pay them. If they want the credit card debt to stay where it is, if they want interest rates not to.
Well, because I think most people don't think it's going to affect them. They think, oh, well, I'm going to be okay. And then when it happens, oops. We're going to find out. But Robin, I appreciate the time.
I'm more worried about the cuts being made than I am about default. And we really want to get the message out there to please call your representatives in Congress and let them know that you want a clean debt bill passed. Whether or not you think it will happen, just call and let them know that the pressure is out there for a clean debt bill, meaning no cuts to Medicaid, no cuts to SNAP, no work requirements, none of this nonsense. Just get this debt ceiling bill passed.
And you guys are running a call-in campaign, right?
Yes, we are.
And people can access that at pahealthaccess.org. It's right there to help.
Yeah, yes, we're going to try to make sure if you sign up to be on our mailing list, yes, you will receive it. That's the way to do that. And you can do that at pahealthaccess.org.
Good stuff. Robin Steele, I appreciate you taking time for us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick. Bye-bye.
Appreciate the time. And look, that's, again, you think about just how bad this is, and for no reason. That's the part that just blows my mind, for absolutely no reason. Want to hear your thoughts? Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. How can unionized workers and unemployed workers stand together? Perhaps we can look to the past for examples of the power of such solidarity. On this day in labor history, the year was 1935. It was the height of the Great Depression. That April, workers who were part of the American Federation of Labor had gone out on strike against the electric auto light plant in Toledo, Ohio. Given the desperate economic times, only about half of the workers participated in the strike, and it seemed likely to fail. But then, the Lucas County Unemployment League joined the effort. An injunction had ruled that only 25 people could picket at a time. The Unemployed League ignored the injunction and crowded the picket lines. On May 21st, they called a meeting of 1,000 unemployed workers to the plant gates. With each passing day, the protests grew. They protested against the company and against the scabs who were brought in to break the strike. Finally, today in labor history, the sheriff decided to turn back the picketers. He marched on the protesting workers with men paid for by the National Guard. They let loose fire hoses and tear gas on the crowd. The picketers responded by throwing bricks and stones through the factory windows. The next day, the 900 National Guard troops marched on the picketers again. They fired their weapons into the unarmed crowd, killing 2 and wounding many more. Across Toledo, unions pledged to join a general strike. In response, the company capitulated, granting a 22% raise and union recognition for the workers. In 2001, a memorial honoring the strikers was commemorated in Toledo's Union Memorial Park. 2 bronze strikers, one male and one female, stand on opposite ends of a low wall. On the wall, the words inscribed read, "Increased wages and improved conditions." Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out our website, ricksmithshow.com. Let's talk stupid. Let's talk Congresswoman. Evidently, Lauren Boebert, was explaining why she quit birth control. Oh boy, I can't wait for this one. She said, quote, I left a prescription at a pharmacy once. I went to get birth control, and I was there at the counter and went to pay for it, and the price was very, very high. And I said, it's cheaper to have a kid. And I left it there, and now I have my third son. Really? This woman's in Congress. This person is making. Do you know who could help lower the cost of contraception? I don't know. Maybe a congresswoman. You know, maybe a congresswoman could propose. What do they call that thing that they do when they do their job? Hold on. I'll remember it from Schoolhouse Rock when I was a kid. Oh, yeah, bill. Maybe they could put a bill forth and people could vote on it and argue about it and pass it and then get it signed into law that says, you know what? We're going to pay for contraception because we're against abortion. This should be a Republican. This should be one of their things. Yes, we're against abortion, but we're going to help people not get pregnant if they don't want to. Seems very sane. Seems almost a bit rational. Seems like something that somebody, well, not a Republican, or at least one of our elected officials. This is a weird moment. And for anybody who's going to listen to Bobo, I have 3 kids. They are not cheap. Contraception would be much, much cheaper, especially if you can't afford them. And to have a congresswoman, to have that literally come out of her mouth is like the height of stupidity. Well, you know, it cost money, so I didn't do it. Whose fault is it? Let me turn this around. Whose fault is it that contraception is so high? I do remember there was a black guy in the White House. What was his name? Hold on. Oh, yeah, Barack Obama. Yeah, Obama was in the White House. And they did this thing on health care. It was Obamacare. Yeah, named after Obama, yes. And in the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, they wanted to make sure that contraception was covered by basic plans. Make sure that and somebody lost their mind. Oh yeah, the entire Republican Party lost their mind and actually then took it to the Supreme Court. I remember there being a loudmouth guy on the radio. What was his name? Oh yeah, Limbaugh. You know, saying that I shouldn't have to pay for, you know, people to have sex, and he said it in a much more vulgar way than that. What was that woman's name? Sandra Fluke, I think maybe that's what it was. This is one of those moments where you go, contraception, something we should be funding in big ways. Now, also understand, as I've been saying for the last 18 years of doing this program, Republicans want to make abortions illegal. They wanted to overturn Roe. Congratulations, they did that. But they also want eventually to go after contraception. So am I surprised that dim-witted gun fetish Barbie is saying, no, I don't want you to cover your pistol. Don't holster that. I don't know. And is this what we want in Congress? Please, Colorado, please do something. It's cheaper to have a kid. Really? I want to hear your thoughts. Is it cheaper to have a kid? I mean, I've got 3 of them. They're pretty pricey. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. I want to hear the thoughts on this one. Is Bobo right? rick@thericksmithshow.com. If you miss any portion of the program, make sure you grab the podcast. Wherever you get your favorite podcast, you'll find ours. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.